I am a total failure. I'm a horrible parent. I'm a terrible mom. I keep losing it and I just don't know how to stay calm. My kids' behaviors are really, really hard. Am I messing them up? What can I do better? I want to change how I'm parenting, but I still keep showing up in these ways that I know are not helpful. I am a failure. If you've said any of these things out loud, if you've thought about them, or maybe you haven't even realized that you've thought about them, and if you do some digging and as you listen to me, you realize, oh my gosh, I do feel like a failure and I'm really struggling with this, then this episode is for you. And before we get into it, I'd like to mention my Purpose Parent Transformation Program, where I take you on a journey to go from feeling like a failure to really digging and learning, but then applying what you learn and making it simple so you don't have to be constantly second guessing yourself in your parenting. And maybe you weren't given the blueprint to raise kids in a healthy, psychologically, emotionally healthy way. And so that is what my program is for. I basically give you the roadmap to figure these things out. All you need to do is go to raisingkidswithpurpose.com/chat, find a time to get on my calendar, and we can talk about all the things and see if I have a program that will best support you in where you are in your parenting journey. Okay, let's get started. The first step to becoming an intentional parent, a better parent, and we're always getting better, right? Even I do this work, I work with parents, and I'm still making sure that what I'm doing, what's coming out of my mouth, how I'm interacting with my kids is resulting in them growing and me growing versus the opposite and unintentionally causing trauma. No, sometimes that definitely has happened. And so the first step to all of this work is to become self aware. So I invite you to just think about what has been going on. Think about where your kids are and whatever ages and stages they are, and think if there's ever been a time where you have felt like a failure. I have definitely been in this spot. And what I've realized, it hasn't really served me or my kids. And that's really what I want to talk about today. And when my first son was born, I've shared a little bit about this, is I had this belief system that if he behaved really well, that meant I was a really good parent. Well, he did not behave, I'm using air quotes if you're listening to this, in the way that society wanted him to as a toddler, because he was not acting like an adult. He was acting like a hyperactive boy who needed to move his body and not be forced to sit still. And because of that, I felt like a failure. I was holding this belief system that I was failing as a mom. And it was really because of the way culture or other people or family members, sometimes they had said statements that I don't think they meant to cause harm or to not be nice, but I didn't take them very well at the time. Now I can handle it much better. And so I was really defining who I was as a parent based on what other people thought. And that caused me to feel like a failure. And it might be things that are going on. Say that your teenager is making some choices that aren't great, or they're really being influenced by culture right now, or you can't stop yelling, or your kids just won't listen. Other ways that might make you feel like a failure is you were on your phone again. You promised yourself you weren't going to scroll when your kids were in the room, and there you were, not paying attention or giving that and not really being intentional or present for them. Other behaviors that your own behaviors or your kids' behaviors that might cause you to feel like a failure is when your kids are having really big tantrums or meltdowns or talking back or not doing everything that you want. Maybe you're acting in those ways and you're unintentionally being disrespectful back to them being disrespectful to you. So I just hope you feel like validated, because there's so many of us parents feel this way. I would venture to guess most parents have felt like they are failing at least once in their parenting journey, if not many, many more times. And really, what I want you to hear is that if you ever do get to this place where you're feeling guilty or you're feeling shame because of you're not able to show up in the way that you want to as a parent, I want to invite you to think about it like this, is that that guilt that you're holding means that you care. I'm going to say this a few times in this episode, but it's not necessarily that you are failing, but you are feeling. And when we can start with awareness, then we have somewhere to go from that, and we can lean into that feeling. We can actually make a change. Here's a trap that I see so many parents getting into. I definitely get into this trap as well because I am a recovering perfectionist. I want to make sure I do everything perfect, and that does not exist. Is we get into this trap of doing everything right, or there's one right way that maybe you just haven't found yet. And then what ends up happening is the standard becomes this moving target because there's so much influence out there. I was listening to a podcast once that they had said, I grew up in the 80s. I did too. My mom had no idea what the mom down the street was doing or had no idea what was going on halfway across the world. And now we are inundated with what everyone's doing. And we need to make sure we do it the right way or we're going to screw up our kids. And really, now, I'm not saying that there's no wrong way because there are things in parenting and parenting advice that can cause a lot of harm, but there's no one right way. We're constantly seeking that out, constantly comparing ourselves, wondering why we can't just get our acts together or why can we not just succeed instead of just being this failure. What happens is our nervous systems become completely exhausted. Become so exhausted from chasing after something that doesn't even necessarily exist. What the research shows is that kids do not need a perfect parent. What they need is your presence and your regulation and repair. We can keep coming back to that, then that is the right path, but there's not one specific right way to do it. When you feel like a failure, your nervous system goes into alarm mode. It's telling you there is an emergency. I'm a failure. I'm not doing this right. Emergency, emergency, emergency. And then from that place, what happens is we can't access our best, highest sense of self, which is called the ventral vagal. We cannot access that part of our nervous system because our alarm system is in overdrive. And then the brain it just gets into this cycle, right? Okay, we have this trigger, we react, then we might feel guilt or shame, then we become dysregulated because of that, or we feel like a failure, and then we repeat that pattern over and over and over again. Parents come and work with me in my Purpose Parent Transformation Program all the time, and they are stuck in this cycle. And they know, they have the knowledge, they've read the books. I worked with a family that read Good Inside and were so excited. Yes, we know what to do now, but they still were being extremely reactive and really struggling with being able to handle every time that their daughter had really big meltdowns. And it was happening a lot because their daughter's nervous system was stuck in a state of fight or flight as well. And it was just this constant cycle. So it's really important that we stop and pause. I've talked about that back in episode 2, as we pause and really look at, what am I thinking? Am I thinking that I'm failing? Then guess what? It's probably going to lead to behaviors that are going to cause you to fail. I'm not here to, I hope you hear this in a very loving, kind way, but sometimes we have to call these things out. Okay, so then Another part of this is, have you ever stopped and looked at how you are wired? A lot of the parents I work with are raising neurodivergent kids, kids with behaviors that traditional methods of parenting just do not work with because they have really highly sensitive nervous systems. And they also have big sensory needs or what's called demand avoidance, and they just cannot handle being told no. We're looking a lot of times at our kids' wiring and their brain differences, but then we forget to flip the mirror on ourselves and look at how we are wired. And this is the missing piece. I feel like a lot of parenting advice and books and all the things are not talking about, because this can really impact your ability to be able to pause. You can sit here and listen to me. You need to pause. But then you're like, I can't freaking pause. And that's because your brain might be wired in a way that makes it really, really challenging. And not that it's impossible, but it might just take a long time and a lot of work and a lot of micro steps to get to that place, not just listening to someone on a podcast telling you to calm down or to pause. Here are some quick reflection prompts that you can answer as you listen to me ask these. So do you flood fast? Like, do you go from 0 to 100 super, super fast? Or just become really flooded? You can't even think clearly or even understand or are aware what your behaviors are in the moment. But after the fact, you're like, oh my gosh, why did I yell and scream again? So answer that question. Do transitions or surprises send you sideways? Oh my goodness, I've grown a lot in this, especially since my brain fully developed in my mid 30s. But I would really, really, really struggle if the schedule changed, if something switched. I mean, just ask my poor husband. He would just really have to regulate with me and help me understand that it's not the end of the world, because to my nervous system, it felt like the end of the world. Does noise, chaos, constant demands, does that make it feel like it's impossible to become calm? If you answered yes to any of these questions, and there's probably a whole laundry list of other questions too, again, go to raisingkidswithpurpose.com/chat. And I'd love to talk to you about these things if you want to dive into them a little bit more. I want to let you know that this is not an excuse. It's an accurate map of your uniquely wired nervous system and brain. And you cannot regulate a nervous system you don't understand. Many, many neurodivergent parents, I didn't find out as neurodivergent until my mid 20s, and then started discovering a little bit more as I started to really learn about my own kids' brains. But so many parents spend their whole life being told that they're too much, or just to calm down, or I don't know why you can't just do it this way. And they've carried this story into parenthood. And then it's really challenging to show up in these ways, even though you really, really want to. So understanding your wiring, maybe you're just a highly sensitive person. That's something you can look up, HSP. I think it's 30 to 40% of the human population are HSPs. And it just means you feel more. And so this work just takes more time. Now here's the reframe. Instead of thinking that you're a failure, or that you are failing your kids, or you're failing as a mom or failing as a dad, is to reframe it to I'm feeling. Because the guilt, I had already said this, but the guilt means that you care, and caring is not the problem. It's the problem is you were not handed a map for your nervous system before they handed that baby to you, or before that baby came out. Here's the shift. Instead of feeling or saying or believing I'm a failure or I'm failing, you want to shift it. I invite you to really embody this and say this. Maybe you're driving in the car or working out and you could say this out loud, is I'm in the middle of a transformation. We're all in the middle of transformation. That is what being human is all about. We are growing and developing and transforming. Imperfect progress still counts. The cycle, though, of these repeated patterns starts with you. Here are some very practical things that you can walk away this episode and you can start applying them is to notice the shame spiral before it starts to take over. And the way we do this is pausing. I talk about pausing all the time, but it is so powerful. We could just learn how to pause and taking one breath. And remember, though, if you're wired a certain way that this is really challenging, maybe you work on it for a whole month. I'm going to work on doing one pause a day for a whole month, or maybe that's just would stress me out. Even saying that, something that works for you, but really try to figure out a way where you can pause and take a breath. And then you can start to say to yourself, that was a rupture and I can repair it. Just because you blew up, just because you did something that would cause you to feel like a failure, doesn't mean you can't go and repair it. The research is really, really clear about this too. We always want to come back to repair and not just, I'm sorry, but meaningful repair. You already care. You're listening to this. So, how can you embody that and show up in true empathy and repair what had happened? And then you want to separate your behaviors, your kids' behaviors from identity. You yelled. You're not a yeller. You're not a bad mom. You simply yelled. Your kids probably yelled. It doesn't mean that they're a bad kid. It just means that they were frustrated and they screamed. And that was the only coping skill that they had access to in that moment. Or maybe that's the only coping mechanism you had access to in that moment. And then get curious. Get curious about what your behaviors are meaning, get curious about what your kids are, and really look at the root cause. Because if we just focus up here on the surface, we're not going to really get anywhere because that just means we're just trying to stop it, but we're not able to truly make sense and understand because that is where we can really start to make some changes. And then if you want to understand more of this, you want to understand more about how you were wired, how you can start shifting these patterns and not feel like a failure as a parent, I invite you to check out my Purpose Parent Transformation Program. You can go to raisingkidswithpurpose.com. Up on the top right, there's a coaching and programs tab. Just click on that, and there's lots of resources I have. Even more than just the full program, I have a play class. I have toolkits on setting boundaries, on helping your kids stop fighting. So I encourage you to go there. And you can also send me a DM. My Instagram handle is Raising Kids with Purpose, or there's also ways to contact me on my website. I hope you leave this episode and realize, first of all, saying I am a failure or believing that you're a failure is not going to serve anyone. And even just listening to me say those words is not going to help you change. What's going to help you change is by doing the work, by pausing, by reflecting, and by repairing. Thank you so much for showing up today. Now go raise your kids with purpose.